Hey everyone, welcome back to Strategically Small. On this video this evening, I'm going to be sharing with you why I chose to go tiny in a studio versus other forms of going tiny. All right. I specifically chose to go tiny in a studio in Africa, which is even more specific. So we're going to get into all the reasons why I chose to do that. Now, just as a general statement, I support whatever means of going tiny that works best for you. So we have tiny house on wheels. We have tiny house in a studio like mine. We have shipping containers that are converted into tiny homes. There are so many ways that you can go tiny these days. So I love all of them, but I specifically chose going via studio for a specific reason. So in this video, I'm going to be comparing tiny house on wheels versus tiny house in a studio. And we're going to be looking at the comparison of the two. And it's not that I am discouraging tiny house on wheels. I think any means, again, going tiny is fantastic. It's just that I think the studio works better for me. All right, so let's get into it. Let's dive in. All right, so first I'm going to talk about tiny house on wheels. All right, the first reason why I decided not to go with tiny house on wheels specifically is because in the US, the pricing for tiny house on wheels is significantly increasing as the movement becomes more popular. All right. So for example, you can spend anywhere from $35,000 all the way up to well over $100,000 for a tiny house on wheels. Now, depending on what state you're living in, over $100,000 may be quite affordable for you, especially if you're living like in California where homes are over 1 million, right? So relative to where you're staying, that may work. But for me, as I was noticing the price increase, I said, well, it doesn't look like it's as affordable as I would like it to be. That's just my opinion, right? Now, of course, you can go the route of building your own tiny home, which a lot of people have done to save costs, right? So if you build your own tiny home, it would be significantly cheaper. However, if you do that, you will run into problem number 2, which is trying to get insurance for your tiny home is very difficult. It's not only difficult if you work with a builder, but you have to remember that your builder has to be RV certified. Normally, you'll need to check with the insurance company's requirements, but normally they look for a builder that's RV certified. They might have a couple other checkpoints that they're looking for. So if you construct your own tiny house on wheels, most likely getting insurance is not going to be attainable for you. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're looking to build your own tiny house on wheels, right? Number 3 is lot rent, okay? When you have a tiny house on wheels in the US, you're not able to just park your home anywhere. There's a lot of legalities around where you can park your tiny house, where is it legal to do it, and unfortunately, you can't just park it in your backyard or someone else's backyard, or if they own a piece of land, you cannot just park your tiny house there. So normally you have to park in a RV community or a tiny house community, and those communities will charge you what is called lot rent. This is a monthly fee that you have to pay in order to allow your tiny house to be parked in a lot on the land, okay? So lot rent in the US roughly is on average $500 a month, and $500 a month is not an inexpensive fee. This is quite expensive, and sometimes it doesn't cover all utilities. So you also have to look at the fine print to see what exactly is covered in the lot rent. But for me, $500 a month on average was just not something that, again, was to me affordable. So there were a number of things that I was looking at: the cost, the lot rent, the insurance, that those were the 3 main factors that sort of swayed me in a different direction. In addition to that, I would say number 4, when you have a tiny house on wheels, you have to remember that this is considered a vehicle, a motor vehicle in the US, okay? Because it is mobile, you can move your tiny house. So because it's a vehicle, For me, for investment purposes, I was a bit concerned about whether it would appreciate over time or depreciate. And as you know, in the US, if you have a vehicle, it depreciates over time. It does not appreciate, okay? So that's something to keep in mind. Most likely your tiny house on wheels will depreciate because it is considered a motor vehicle. And also your tiny house, you have to remember, is highly customized, okay? So the way that you have designed it with your builder, or if you built it yourself, may be fantastically wonderful for you, but for the next buyer coming in, they may not like everything that you have done structurally or design-wise inside. So they will then have to factor in doing work after they acquire your home, and they would want a discounted price for that. So those are things to consider if you're thinking about turning your tiny house into an investment later down the line. And also along the lines of investment, I would say the legalities of turning a tiny house on wheels into investment is also not so clear, okay? I know that on Airbnb, you see these lovely tiny houses that you can go and stay for a couple of nights if you would like. Normally, those ones are not on wheels. Those tiny homes are built on a piece of land, and it's fixed. It's a structural home on the land, so it's not mobile. But if you have a tiny house on wheels, trying to turn that into an investment property may be slightly challenging legally. Also, the community where you're parked may not allow that. If you have to look at the fine print to see if they only allow residential or if they also allow investment tiny homes there. Also, remember that when you are parked in a tiny house community or an RV park community, that is land that is owned by an individual or a company, right? However, when ownership changes, okay, if they decide one day that they're ready to sell the land to somebody else, the new owner may have no interest in running a tiny house community or an RV park community. So what that means is now you have to find a whole new community to relocate your tiny house on wheels to. And as you know, tiny house communities are not very prevalent in the US, so this may be something that is quite difficult for you to do. So that's something to keep in mind. The owner of the land has every legal right to sell the land whenever they want to. But that is going to impact you directly because you're renting on the land, and whenever they decide to sell it, if the new owner has no interest, you have to move. I would say the last point I would say is if you're living in a colder environment where you have long winters or lots of snow, heavy long winters, you have to remember that your piping runs underneath the house and it's exposed to the elements. So you would have to spend more money on insulation. It may be more costly if you want to run your piping underneath the ground in order to protect it from the elements, which a lot of people do opt to do. That is safer for your pipes, but of course that also costs money to run the piping under the ground. So these are things just to keep in mind. So for those reasons, I was a little bit hesitant about a tiny house on wheels. Although I'm in full support, I love looking at them and I think they're a fantastic idea. It was just for me personally, I chose not to go that route. Okay, now the route that I did go, let me explain why I went that route, and specifically in Africa, all right? So the first thing is a studio style tiny house, okay? Remember, this is still a tiny house because it's under 500 square feet. This is 355 square feet. Now, I chose to go this route for a number of reasons. The first one being, in Africa specifically, studios are not very pricey, okay? Now, the housing market is up and coming here, so things are getting more expensive as time goes by, but in comparison to a studio in the US, this is quite affordable, all right? If you wanna know how much I paid for it, go check out the video where I fully break down the numbers for you. You can get an idea there, but comparably to the US, Africa is much more affordable, all right? Next thing is condominiums in Africa are still up and coming. So it's not a concept that is everywhere as it is in the US. And For that reason, condo fees here, if they charge a condo fee at all, I have a condo fee here. It's very small, okay? Normally condo fees in Africa are under $50 versus the couple $100s you'd be paying in condo fees in the US, right? I've never seen a condo fee in the US that's under $100. Like, it just does not exist. So you're gonna be paying several $100s a month in condo fees in the US versus in Africa. It's very inexpensive if there is a condo fee at all, right? The third reason why I chose to go this route is in this country in particular, I'm in Rwanda, there is no property taxes for your first residential property, okay? If you live in the property, you do not have any property taxes to pay, okay? This alone was a major point for me, okay? In the US, it doesn't matter where you are going to be paying property taxes on your house, your dwelling, okay? So having that removed is a major plus. Now, of course, for any other properties that you acquire, investment properties, you will be paying property tax on those. But for your residential property, there is no property tax, all right? Number 4, I would say appreciation is something that I always wanted to keep in my mind. I wanted to make sure I was investing in something that would appreciate and not depreciate, okay? Because eventually I would like to turn this into an investment property and move into another property. So as time goes by, I want to see that my investment is growing and not decreasing, right? So the appreciation is something that is very important to me, that was a little skeptical in versus tiny house on wheels, right? So when you're in an apartment style studio like this, you know that as with any other real estate, things are appreciating. So I appreciate that. Now, also insurance coverage. When you're in a dwelling like this, you can easily get insurance coverage. So again, that will vary per country. Same thing as the property taxes, that will vary per country. So you have to do your research and check that out. But in Rwanda specifically, insurance coverage is something that is attainable if you would like insurance coverage on your studio. All right. Here, because this is not a tiny house on wheels, this is a studio, there is no lot rent. Okay. So that removes several $100s of expense out of my budget. Okay. I don't have to worry about that. And I really, as much as I like the concept of tiny house on wheels, because you're able to, move around the country, you can go visit wherever you would like with your house, there is a cost that comes with that. So for me, the elimination of the lot rent was a major plus, all right? And the next one is when I'm ready to turn this property into investment, there's not going to be any legal challenges that I have to get around in order to convert this into a rental, right? If I were in a tiny house on wheels, that is also something that is not guaranteed. So I wanted something where I knew by the time I'm ready to leave here, I can easily just turn this into a rental and move on to my next property. All right, so that was important to me. So those are the reasons why I chose to do a studio versus tiny house on wheels. Now, again, I support all forms of going tiny because it's not only good for the environment, it's good for you financially. So I'm going to be covering the other various forms and other videos like the shipping containers. I think those are quite interesting as well. But I wanted to break down specifically why I chose a studio versus tiny house on wheels and some of these other options that are out there. All right, so I hope that helped you a little bit, and I hope you guys are having a blessed weekend, and I'll see you in the next video. Talk to you soon. Bye.